So our next speaker is Dr. Azaya Negedu, who will be speaking to us on should Sub-Saharan Africa be hopeful about the emergence of technologized personhood. Dr. Azaya Negedu is a lecturer in the Department of Philosophy at the Federal University of Lafayette, Nigeria. He was on a fellowship, at the School of Religion, Philosophy, and Classics in the University of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. He is a member of the Conversational Society of Philosophy, Philosophers Association of Nigeria, and the Nigerian Bar Association. He has published articles in academic journals and edited books. He is the guest editor of a special issue in Philosophia Theoretica titled Honorary Whiteness, Dilutions of Racial Hierarchy, and co-editor of African Democracy, Impediments, Promises, and Prospects. Dr. Azaya, please speak to us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Amara Chimakonam, for, again, hosting this colloquium, and thanks to all the speakers. Well, I am happy because my topic is centered around the discourse on personhood between two scholars, and the two scholars in question happen to be part and parcel of this colloquium. So I hope that I'll be able to get we'll be able to get some responses, some clarifications if need be, and probably revision of ideas. So my topic is, should Sub-Saharan Africa be hopeful in the emergence of technologized personhood? Now, I use a technologized personhood as extracted from the response, that Amara Chimakonam gave to the work of Ademola Fayemi. So I choose to focus on the ideas of these two scholars. First is Personhood in a Transhumanist Context and African Perspective by Ademola Kazim Fayemi. The second is Transhumanism in Africa, a conversation with Ademola Fayemi on his Afrofuturistic account of personhood by Amara Esther Chimakonam. Now, both works for me are the first in African philosophy discourse that have been engaged in a rigorous conversation on issues that centers on the fourth industrial revolution. And for me, of course, my basic worry after presenting their thoughts is that I believe that both ideas neglected some essential aspects in discussing the preparedness of Africa in, a transhumanist and posthumanist context. So first of all, I turn to the Afrofuturistic account of personhood by Ademola Fayemi. Now, Fayemi began by making a claim that some transhumanist elements can be found in both the normative and ontological concepts of personhood, and some cannot be found. He argued for an Afrofuturistic concept of personhood as he claimed that it captures the full intent of the transhumanist goal. Fayemi further used the Yoruba understanding of personhood, which has two elements, the Inu, which is the ontological dimension, and the Iwa, which is the normative dimension, to buttress his point. And while the Inu deals with the psychological self, the Iwa deals with the moral self or character. But at the same time, the Inu for him animates the Iwa. So from the explanation of the ontological and normative accounts of personhood by Fayemi, it is clear that the Yoruba does not have a predetermined account of personhood, since the Inu develops in the individual. And because personhood is not static, we can conceptualize an Afrofuturistic account of personhood. Now, this is just, a summary of Fayemi's account of personhood. And I want to turn again to Technologized Personhood by Amara Esther Chimakonam before I state, before I come to the issues, in those ideas. Now, Technologized Personhood deals with the intersection of technology and identity in human development. Amara Chimakonam relied on Menkiti's concept of personhood as the foundation of technologized personhood. And she said that communal norms shape the notion of personhood. Then the ability of individuals to align their values with that of the community confers personhood. Now, I want us to know that Amara is not proposing technologized personhood. She only renamed the Afrofuturistic account of personhood technologized personhood. And, she argues against technologized personhood in Africa, not argue for. So, and there are some implications she drew from her works, which of course Fayemi has mentioned some. And one of them is that that normative personhood will be radicalized if technology is used to enhance personhood. Personhood in Africa will lose its value. It means that no one could fail at personhood. Growth and progress will no longer be needed. There will be no distinction between moral perfection and imperfection. Morality will be made trivial. And in conclusion, it's going to defy the importance that Menkiti placed on the concept of personhood. Now, I now turn, first of all, to some gaps I noticed in the Afrofuturistic account of personhood. And one of those gaps for me is what I consider, the leap from the Inu to the Uwa, then to Afrofuturism. I should first of all say that, well, for me, it is commendable that the Inu has some form of flexibility, and this makes it amenable to changes that may be occasioned by the desirability of a better society. But however, I believe there is still a path which is not accounted for between the development of the Inu and the Afrofuturistic account of personhood. So when we make reference to certain conditions or principles, for instance, in African community, I believe that what propels such conversation is the existence of some gaps that deter the proper functioning of development. So in the context of the African, that is the Yoruba account of personhood, the leap from traditional society, then to colonial, and then to post-colonial societies has brought some changes in the way society is viewed. Now, this is also partly responsible for the differences in the use of some concepts, within civil democratic space. So the shift shows that we can no longer speak of traditional African communities as a static moment in history, since culture is inherently dynamic. Now, I raise these preliminary issues to underscore, the fact that an account of personhood in a transhumanist context should first of all think of the leap from tradition to civil democracy. Now, the problem of each society are different, but there could be some commonalities. For instance, for example, you find people who are corrupt in every society. Then you have some health challenges that you can find everywhere around the world. For instance, cancer. Hypothetically speaking, for me, in a transhumanist society, these challenges need to be resolved by means of technology. It will also need some clinical trials in the case of health management system. Every society that thinks of ways to improve health and bring innovation should first of all think of local problems and then the possibility of globalizing solutions after local needs have been met. You see, Fayemi made reference to Afrofuturistic accounts of personhood that is not consumed by its peculiarities when he made reference to this. Then he went ahead to recommend piecemeal application. Now, in his presentation, today, well, I was happy where it's as much as it is a response to Chimakonam, the use, the instance of oxytocin that he used to buttress, his argument, becomes relevant for me. Because if you look at the use of oxytocin, we have, peer-reviewed journals, peer-reviewed medical journals that have shown to us that the oxytocin that you have in low and middle income countries are substandard. They are not the same oxytocin you find everywhere around the world. So you see that context becomes necessary in the application of, such, an enhancement. But I see Fayemi's call for piecemeal application as a recognition of the peculiarity of the African condition. In this light, if cultural context is not a necessary condition for transhumanist engagement, then the Afrofuturistic account of personhood will fail in its proposal, because you already have the prefix Afro. And if you are talking of a piecemeal application and we don't need, some peculiarities, then that prefix Afro should be neglected, which I don't think should be, it shouldn't be neglected. And this is where I believe that cultural context matters in the application of technology, not in the sense that Africa should be aversive to development in technology, but that to get the desired positive outcome that was planned for a host society, proponents of transhumanism and posthumanism should first of all think of any possible setbacks that could arise if the same technology is applied unrevised in new cultural contexts where clinical trials have not been carried out. Now, well, this is even more important for me, as we are made to understand that algorithm bias, can lead to faulty results in AI technology. Chen has identified, algorithm-based biases that occur as a result of input of inadequate or false data by algorithm developers, to suggest that the transhumanist and posthumanist goal, which culminates in singularity, if and will be universally fair, cannot be guaranteed. Algorithm bias can lead to faulty results in AI technology, but on their own, algorithms cannot discriminate. They have no capacity to discriminate against people. Algorithms are fed to the system by human beings. An inadequate data set can lead to bias in favor of some. Now, Naomi Klein also made reference to what she calls AI hallucinations, and some of these hallucinations are the fact that, the use of enhancement, in transhumanism and posthumanism can cause some moral problems, can lead to equality, can lead to equity in some instances, and can even solve the problem of corruption. And she termed, these claims, AI hallucination. And the use of hallucination is in the context of, for me, grandiose delusion of individuals who are in a state of power and can influence the public based on the resources available to their disposal. So a delusional belief in this sense can be said to be a false belief that is based on incorrect inference about external reality that is firmly sustained and held with some abnormal intensity. Considering the influence that some CEOs of major tech companies and even pharmaceutical companies, have, we can liken some of their convictions to delusions, in the sense that their fixed beliefs on the future of their companies and technology is not subject to change and is based on inferences about external reality that may be incorrect. Then I want us to just clearly note that Afrofuturism, here refers to speculative fiction that deals with African American varying experiences. Now, when the concept was coined, from its onset, it was used, to refer to the experiences of, Afro-Americans and their experiences. These experiences is as a result of the fact that they've not had an unblemished chance, to exercise their freedom, to exercise human potential in the world as a result of slavery and colonialism. So Afrofuturism offers a chance to escape the tight confines of a racialized destiny and move forward into a future that can make impact in the world. So Fayemi describes, Afrofuturism in the lens of critical African imagination of a post-human future. Now, in order for me, in order to visualize the future, our mind should first of all be focused on reality. That is what I think. Without reality, it is difficult to visualize any future. So any discourse on the future in Afrofuturism must take into account what is before considering what can be. Again, it is possible to reflect on what is the now of the African condition and choose to jump into a future that we can actually envision and wish to have, while at the same time neglecting some processes necessary for the assessment of such future. And that is where I believe that visualizing Afrofuturism in Africa is possible if we rely more on hope, if we rely more, on optimism rather than hope. Because Fayemi suggests that we should be hopeful in transhuman futures. But for me, I think that when people believe or are hopeful that an idea or policy will work, if institutions implement them, they should also remember that there are leaders that have been elected or selected to make it work in reality. So ab initio, I believe that policymakers know if a system will work or not. And that is why, for me, hope is a function of a coherent reality. I've made reference to Adam Kadlak that differentiates a cynic from a person who is hopeful. A person who is hopeful have made, some intentional movement towards progress. So the morality to hope stems from the will to act. Hope is therefore a belief in the probability of a future reality to which some intentional actions have been done. Now, why have I raised these issues about hope in a transhuman future? I've explained this so that each person and each society should think for themselves whether they have a right to be hopeful in a transhumanist or posthumanist future, or whether such a hope is actually fraudulent. Now, I want to turn to some issues, arising from, the normative account of personhood given by Amara Chimakonam before, I raise my conclusions on both of them. So the reliance on Menkiti in the midst of other scholars shows that, of course, Menkiti's idea of normative personhood appeals more to Chimakonam. So if we are going to rely on different conceptions of personhood in Africa, then we will find each one of them problematic without capturing in its entirety the subject of transhumanism. Fayemi in his presentation today speaks of a balance between the individual and community. So let me assume that the import of technologized personhood is not to create room for universality, but for particularism. Now, it would be improper to then implicate transhumanism in Africa's personhood. And this is because at first glance, transhumanism appears to be a universal project, but with some regional twist. I made this claim, because, transhumanist and posthumanist projects, like I said initially, have been accused of, algorithm bias by human beings. But, there is another scholar I wish to reference, and it is Robert Falconer. And I make reference to Robert Falconer because Robert Falconer, delved into the conversation between Fayemi and Chimakonam. But, while delving into the conversation, he decided to align with Chimakonam's, technologized personhood as against Fayemi. Now, the crux of the disagreement of Fayemi's transhumanist accounts by Falconer and Chimakonam lies in the fact that the end of the transhumanist future is evidentially correct, but it is procedurally wrong. Since the process to personhood is eliminated, so Chimakonam and Falconer agree with the end in view, which is to always do good. However, they decry the absence of moral responsibility, which is replaced with algorithms, which then brings about singularity in posthumanism. Now, this explains why transhumanism will be incomplete without a posthuman future. Now, I want to extend, this conversation further by hypothetically thinking that moral responsibility is not eliminated in a transhumanist future if enhanced through artificial intelligence. Now, when AI, for instance, is merged with human identity to produce enhanced humans, what will the African be like in such a society? Now, this is a question I want us to keep in mind as I go further. So personhood in Africa will lose its value, or that we could fail as personhood, as Chimakonam has claimed, Now, I find the Afro-normative accounts and the theological accounts by Chimakonam and Falconer problematic on the ground that the main issue with the transhumanist goal is the claim that it takes away human freedom to make choices. The Afro-ethical burden with technologized personhood is that it will eliminate the normative aspects of personhood. The theological concern is the claim that it will affect the foundational aspects of Christian belief, which is imperfection that is occasioned by Adam's fall. That is what Falconer claims. Now, that is why Robert Falconer chose to align with the Afro-ethical concern raised by technologized personhood. So, but I am interested in the foundation that these two scholars have raised because they fear that, technologized personhood will eliminate an essential aspect of both the African and the Christian, accounts of being human. In the first place, I think that one of the purposes of scholarship is to shake the foundations of previously held beliefs and knowledges. This is necessary in order to allow for new possibilities. But such new possibilities do not bring an end to knowledge. For if they do, then it's going to be an end to scientific inquiry and the end of progress. So a critique that is posed by, dissent of singularity claim that singularity is the end of progress, since it means human perfection, which for me, of course, is another hallucination. Let me assume that the fear is correct. Now, no invention that appears perfect is perfect in itself, because I think that which is perfect needs constant review to improve the so-called perfect state. So the theological fear that Falconer imagines is worrisome on the ground that the qualities attributed to the Christian God are creations of humans. Of course, these qualities we attribute to the Christian God are human creations. The theological concern has not been able to address the fact that for some scientists too, science is God. So if the theological God is perfect, the scientists work tirelessly to ensure that the experimental God reaches the height of perfection too. The difference is in the fact that why one is transcendental, the other is experimental. But the problem for me now stems from the fact that while the experimental struggles with absolute human perfection within scientific limits, the transcendental focuses on the goal of the experimental, forgetting the fact that in the final analysis, the experimental cannot take the place of the transcendental because their methods are different. And it is therefore worrisome that the transcendental intends to subject the experimental to a method that is alien to the experimental. Now, this I also think will apply to the afro-normative concern. If we agree that method is central to ideas, then the afro-normative proponent should worry not about the conclusions of the transhumanists and posthumanists, but to grapple with Afro-methodic challenges that will produce Afro-transhumanist projects with its own peculiarity. And that is why I think we should be careful, my next point, in absolutize, so that we don't absolutize, normative concept of personhood. Because we can, for instance, decide to look elsewhere and take, for instance, Plato, who equated knowledge with virtue and vice with ignorance, or Plotinus that held that evil is the difference between good intentions and its actual behavior. Now, when we take these two, philosophers from the West, for instance, we will conclude that the desire of everyone is to do good. Now, if we go by such moral claims that the desire is to do good, which Fayemi and Cornelius have also claimed in their article on transhumanism and African humanism, that the desire is to do good, then moral enhancement in personhood will become meaningful, since technology will help achieve that human desire, which is to do good. So we can choose another variety of personhood in another context, and we will move in a different direction. Therefore, Menkiti's claim to personhood in Africa is just one of some of many other claims.
Okay, please.
So we can reach the point. Sorry, I can't hear you.
I say sorry to cut in. You have 5 minutes more to round up, please.
All right. Okay. So when we reach the point where we have to decide which notion of personhood works for Africa, I think that we should be guided by a principle in conversational philosophy or thinking to determine which side of the scientific divide works per time for Africa. So in conclusion, I think if moral responsibility is preserved and both accounts of transhumanism in Fayemi and Chimakonam are taken into consideration, it means the end in view will now be achieved and acceptable to both transhumanist views. Now, my claim is that when we achieve transhumanism of the kind that is being projected, we still have a problem of determining the importance of such development to the African, whose current problem must first be solved before entering into a posthuman future. The stage of a transhumanist and posthumanist account, which culminates in singularity, I think can be a dialogue in the first world economies, which have to a large extent responded to basic demands of their citizens. Because I think we are going to have, we are going to find ourselves in a discursive dilemma when we want to take, for instance, development in different countries within Africa and think that because a particular country is progressing, it means Africa is progressing. Now, we are going to fall in a discursive dilemma if we find ourselves, with such conclusion. Now, what is the impact of the above discourse in a transhumanist and posthumanist future? It is the fact that a transhuman and posthuman Africa will breach both the procedurally based account of personhood that is raised by Chimakonam and will breach also the result-based account that is raised by Fayemi. How is this possible? There is a stage in development that is not well accounted for, and that is the stage where we need to solve some basic problems responsible for Africa's failures: corruption, poverty, and so on. Now, this is not a stage for me that can be solved by singularity. It's a stage that is supposed to be solved prior to a transhumanist and posthumanist, futures. I am therefore hopeful about technologized personhood, universally speaking, but contextually speaking. From my account of what hope is, I am not hopeful within the African context, but my disagreement is not for the same reason that technologized personhood in Amara Chimakonam, argues against, but it's for a different reason of the fact that it has not taken into account, some of our challenges that is necessary before we think of a transhumanism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Negedu, for your lecture. Thank you for the critical engagement. Thank you. Okay.